right, and welcome to my, let's see, what number is this? My third re-review video. Today, and I don't have the movie with me to show you because I don't know where it is. Today I'll be re-reviewing, in my opinion, an extremely underrated movie. It's unfortunate that it's as overlooked as it is nowadays, unfortunately. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, released in 2012, directed by Timur Bekmambetov, and based on the 2010 mashup novel of the same name. Yes, indeed. So for those of you who don't remember, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter was one of the very first movies that I ever reviewed. In fact, I think it was the second movie that I ever reviewed on this channel. I don't really know why exactly I reviewed this movie at the time. I think it was just because I had recently gotten my hands on the film. I watched it, I loved it, and I finally decided, you know what? Yeah, I'll review this movie, and so I did. And it's terrible. It's a terrible review. Do not watch my original review of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. It's terrible. So let's get into the plot of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, shall we? So the film begins in 1818, where Abraham Lincoln, played by Benjamin Walker, well, not as a young boy, but still, he ends up being played by Benjamin Walker, lives in Indiana with his parents, Nancy and Thomas Lincoln, who work at a plantation owned by the disgusting, slimy piece of shit Jack Bartz, played by Martin Sokas. I think that's how you pronounce his name. There, Lincoln comes to the aid of his friend William Johnson, a young African American boy played by Anthony Mackie, who is being beaten by a slaver. And because of his son's actions, Thomas Lincoln is fired by Jack Bartz, and that night Abraham Lincoln sees Bartz break into his home and attack his mother, and she falls ill the next day, and shortly afterwards she dies. Let's see. Nancy Lincoln obviously did not die because of a vampire bite. She died. Let's see, how did she die? She died October 15th, 1818, at 34 years old. And there are two views as to the cause of her death. One view is that she died of milk sickness, and the second is that she died of consumption. What the hell is consumption? An infectious disease caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So there's two theories as to how she died, but in this movie it's revealed that she died of a vampire bite. Nine years later, in 1827, after Lincoln's father finally passes away, a vengeful Abraham tries to kill Jack Bartz at the docks. However, Bartz, who's actually a vampire, overpowers him after taking a shot in the eye with a musket. And however, before Bartz can kill Lincoln, he is rescued by Henry Sturgis, played by Dominic Cooper. And Sturgis explains to Lincoln the next morning at his house that vampires exist, and offers to teach... Well, actually, no, he doesn't offer to teach Lincoln to be a vampire hunter. Lincoln convinces Henry to teach him to kill vampires because he wants to kill Jack Bartz for killing his mother. And after 10 years of training, Lincoln travels to Springfield, Illinois. And during his training, Henry tells Lincoln that all vampires in America descend from Adam, played by Rufus Sewell, who is like this film's version of Dracula, the oldest vampire in existence. Who is a vampire, owns a slave plantation in New Orleans with his sister Vadoma, played by Erin Wasson, who is an evil, evil bitch. And Henry tells Lincoln of the vampire's weaknesses. Silver, which, to quote Henry, Judas's gift for betraying Jesus was 30 pieces of silver. And upon that day, silver became the cursed upon the cursed. And upon telling him this, Henry gives Lincoln a silver pocket watch for reasons I'll get to momentarily. And in Springfield, Abraham befriends Joshua Speed, played by Jimmy Simpson, who is a local shopkeeper, and asks him, could I, work at the store and stay in the room upstairs, because I'm studying to be a lawyer. And it's at that point he meets Mary Todd, played by the extremely hit-and-miss actress Mary Elizabeth Winstead. And though Henry had warned him during his training not to form any close relationships with anybody, he does eventually develop romantic feelings for Mary. Now, this is a big difference from Abraham Lincoln's real life, as the only love in his real life that he had was when he was a young teenager. However, she died of some type of brain fever. It's well known due to the fact that Lincoln did not have a very good relationship with his wife while he was older. In fact, I believe the only reason he did marry her was because he had to have a social status type thing or some shit. And Lincoln, after killing quite a few vampires, finally defeats Bartz. However, before dying, Bartz tells Lincoln that Henry is also a vampire, which Lincoln confronts him, who reveals that several years ago, while out and about with his love interest, he was attacked and bitten by Adam. However, because Henry's soul was impure, he became a vampire, and that prevents him from harming Adam or any other vampire. But this is actually kind of bullshit, because we see him harm other vampires throughout the film. And Henry has since been training vampire hunters in his hope to finally kill Adam. Abraham decides to abandon his mission of killing vampires after this. However, Adam learns of his vampire hunting activities and kidnaps Johnson in order to lure him into a trap at his slave plantation in New Orleans. Adam captures Lincoln and tries to recruit him to his plans, revealing he wants to turn the U.S. into a nation of vampires in order to take over the world. And one of my favorite one of my favorite lines in all fiction movies that I kind of like to throw at religious people that get on my nerves is that Lincoln says, "You just want a nation of slaves," and to which Adam reports with, "Men have enslaved each other since they invented gods to forgive them for doing so." I don't know why, but that line really resonates with me for some reason. But anyway, however, Joshua Speed comes to the rescue of Lincoln and his friends, and they escape to Ohio. And after that, Lincoln marries Mary and begins his political career campaigning to abolish slavery. And is at this time in the movie, Lincoln symbolically puts on his famous top hat and grows the beard, which he has for the rest of the movie. Henry warns Lincoln that the slave trade is what keeps vampires out of the spotlight. It keeps them under control, as vampires use slaves as food. However, if Lincoln was to get rid of that, the vampires would surely retaliate. And after Lincoln's election as the President of the United States, he moves to the White House with Mary, where they have only one son, William Wallace Lincoln, which is a big, big difference to Lincoln and Mary's, or Abraham and Mary Lincoln's real life, as they had 4 children. One was named William, yes. However, the White House is infiltrated by Vadoma, and she tracks down William, and she bites him, and he dies of a poison bite. Confederate President Jefferson Davis, played by John Rothman, teams up with Adam to deploy his vampires on the front lines of the Civil War in order to wipe out the North's forces. However, when he finds this out, Lincoln orders the collection and compensation or confiscation of all silverware in the entire area and has it melted down to get silver bayonets, silver swords, silver knives, silver musket balls, silver cannonballs. All weapons are melted down by silver. And Speed, believing that Lincoln is slowly tearing apart the U.S. Through Civil War, defects and informs Adam and Vadoma that Lincoln will be transporting a shit ton of silver by train, trying to get it to Gettysburg, which is the nastiest and bloodiest battle of the Civil War. At least to my knowledge it was. The entire Civil War was a fucking mess. However, on the train, Adam and Vadoma, who have set fire to the upcoming bridge, attack Lincoln, Sturgis, and Johnson. And during the fight, Speed is killed, and Adam learns that the train that they are on is holding only rocks, it being a decoy. And Lincoln reveals that Speed's betrayal was simply a ruse to lure Adam into a trap. And after a very long fight and a very tense chase, Lincoln finally kills Adam by wrapping his silver pocket watch around his fist, using it as a brass knuckle, and impales Adam through the chest with his arm, killing him, and the 3 escape the train before it explodes. And meanwhile, Mary and all the ex-slaves have transported all the silver to Gettysburg through the Underground Railroad. And the now leaderless Confederate vampires stage a final massive assault, and they are met by the Union, now enhanced with their silver weaponry. And the Union soldiers destroy the vampires and eventually win. And during that battle, Mary confronts Vadoma, and Mary finally kills her, shooting her in the head with a small silver sword. And nearly 2 years later, on April 14th, 1865, which was the day that Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Henry tells Lincoln that the remaining vampires have fled the U.S., and Henry tries to convince Lincoln to allow him to turn him immortal, so that he can continue to bite vampires. However, Lincoln declines, and it's heavily implied that he would go on to the movie theater that he went to on that fateful night and be assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. And in modern times, Henry Sturgis, approaches a man at a bar in D.C., just as he had approached Lincoln in 1827, and it's implied that the entire cycle is to be repeated all over again. Okay. So overall, what do I think of this plot? Well, I think it's a very well thought out, very well recreated, just very well told original story. I never really thought the day. I mean, yes, the concept is ridiculous. Abraham Lincoln, vampire hunter. Ridiculous concept. But I never thought I'd see the day where this concept would be turned to something that's one of the most entertaining movies I've ever seen. I am a fan of period pieces and Civil War films and older style, um, or not older style, but films that take place during an older war, like the Revolutionary War, Civil War, War 1812. I've yet to see that, but I'm sure that one's out there. Um, World War One, World War Two, specifically World War One. I think there's too many, way too many World War Two movies out there. But I do like older style period piece films that are set in wars like this that have to do with um, the Civil War and all that kind of stuff. One of my favorite films of all time, well, it's not really a film, it's a miniseries, is The Blue and the Gray, which is a Civil War miniseries that encompasses the entire 4-year run of the Civil War. I think it was 4 years. I think. Let me look it up real quick. Yeah, it was 4 years. Okay. After 4 years of conflict, the last major Confederate armies surrendered to the U.S. in April of 1865. So, yeah, 4 years. It was a nasty battle. 650,000 people were killed in just a span of 4 years. A giant fucking mess. But overall, I really do think that this movie's plot is well constructed. I like how the author of the book also wrote the screenplay to the film, and I respect that he tried his damnedest to stay as true to the real life Abraham Lincoln as much as possible. However, there are quite a few liberties taken with Lincoln's actual life, which is to be expected. Unless you're like a die-hard history buff, I don't think you can get your panties in a twist too much over how much this movie deviates from the real-life Abraham Lincoln. And so with all that said, let's get into the pros and cons of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I really kind of mainly have the same pros and cons that I have with my my original review. I just have a lot more to say about, at least I think I have a lot more to say about him. Pro number one is I think overall the film's pace is very, very well executed. It's not amazingly executed, I will admit that. There are a couple moments that are a little slowly paced, and there are a few moments in the movie that are a little too quickly paced. Like the beginning of the second act, for example, where Lincoln is doing solo vampire kills, but I'll get to that momentarily. And just in general, I do feel like this movie's pace is very well done. The first act is a lot of world building and a lot of character building, which I do like to see, with some bits of action thrown in here and there. But the second act is probably where the pacing suffers the most, is because it's just kind of off and on. Sometimes it's quick and sometimes it's slow, and sometimes it tries to be both, but it's unsuccessful. And the third act overall is a little more quickly paced, though half of me feels like it was a little too short, a little too rushed, but also half of me feels like, yeah, it's fine. If you don't look into it too much, you're not going to really be too pissed off about it. So overall, I think the film's pace is very, very well executed. It's flawed, but not terribly flawed. Pro number two is that all around the board, the acting for all except Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I just kind of feel like in some cases she's a little okay. In the first half of the film, her acting is pretty solid. She acts like just a fun-loving, young, slightly naive, but also in some ways a little wise for her years, young woman. In the second half of the movie, I feel like her acting takes a massive nosedive because she just has this solemn, forlorn, oh woe is me look on her face throughout the second half of the film. Some may say, well, she loses her son, so it's understandable, but still, it's kind of hard for me to be attached to her when she's just looking so mopey and depressed for the second half of the film. And also even before her son dies, the look on she just has this distant, almost dead look on her face. And it's just hard for me to get attached to her when she's looking like that. I've always compared Mary Elizabeth Winstead to kind of like a female Keanu Reeves. Sometimes she's a good actor, sometimes she's not. Sometimes she gives a genuinely good performance, other times she doesn't. In this movie, I hate to say it, I kind of think she doesn't. Though it's not as bad as, say, her role in the 2006 remake of Black Christmas, or it's not as good as her performance in 10 Cloverfield Lane. She's just kind of hit and miss. But overall, the rest of the cast is very, very, very solid. Benjamin Walker as Abraham Lincoln. When he's younger, he doesn't look anything like Abraham Lincoln. Except for maybe the fact that he's so tall. Because Abe Lincoln was a very, very tall guy. Especially for his time. Back in the 1880s and throughout, the average height of a man was 5'7" to 5'9". Lincoln was 6'4" without his hat on. With his hat on, he was a whopping 7 feet. So he's a very tall and intimidating man in some respects, kind of like George Washington. In the 1700s, the average height of a man was 5'7", and George Washington at that time was 6'4". So he was a towering giant at that time, just like Abe Lincoln. But other than that, as a young man, especially when he's clean-shaven, he doesn't look anything like Abraham Lincoln. However, he does play Abraham Lincoln very, very well. When he's got the beard and when he's older, and especially when he's wearing the hat, he does look quite a bit like the real-life Abraham Lincoln. He still kind of has the baby face, non-sunken eyes, because Abraham Lincoln had very, very deep eye sockets. He had a very pronounced forehead and a very pronounced cheekbones. Benjamin Walker doesn't have that, even with the makeup and the beard on. However, thankfully, when he is older, at least in the context of the film, he does look a lot more like Lincoln, the real life Lincoln. Let's see. William Johnson, played by Anthony Mackie, and hang on, let me look this guy up real quick. Okay. William H. Johnson, for those of you who don't know, was the personal valet of Abraham Lincoln. And having first met him in Springfield, Illinois, he accompanied the president-elect to Washington, D.C., and once there, he was employed in various jobs, part-time as Lincoln's, as president's valet and barber, and also as a messenger for the Treasury Department, which garnered him about $600 a year, which nowadays that's nothing, but back in the 1800s, that was a fair amount of money. He unfortunately did pass away in 1863 1864, January 12th, 1864, after tending to Lincoln, who was sick with smallpox. He ended up contracting smallpox himself, and whereas Lincoln recovered, unfortunately, by January 28th, William H. Johnson did pass away from smallpox. However, here, William Johnson, played by Anthony Mackie, he does a relatively good job. Sometimes he doesn't really have the most expressive face. He just kind of has this stern look on his face throughout the entire film. But he is good in a fight. Excuse me. He's got some decent dialogue. The guy who plays him, he does a good job with the performance. And overall, he's a good secondary protagonist to get attached to. And let's see, Rufus Sewell, I hope I pronounced that last name right, or Rufus Sewell as Adam. He's glorious when he's on screen. Adam really doesn't have a whole lot of screen time, which is unfortunate. But when he is on screen time, you can tell that Mr. Sewell is utterly eating this role up, and he's having so much fun doing it. And also, let's see, Dominic Cooper as Henry Sturgis. He kind of plays the badass, but also bitter and somewhat beaten down mentor archetype character, who still proves to be a useful badass in the end. And also the plot twist of Henry actually being a vampire halfway through the film. It's executed well, and just overall, he's a very good tertiary protagonist to get attached to. And overall, the acting from the rest of the cast is overall pretty solid. Pro number 3, I already kind of touched upon this, is that the characters are great. Lincoln, he's well executed. He ultimately is very similar, at least presidential-wise, and in the White House-wise, he is very similar to the real-life Abraham Lincoln. And, Adam is a great villain. His sister, Vadoma, I guess she's got some threatening presence to her, but she barely has any dialogue in the film, but her character is a cruel piece of shit, and she executes that well. Oh, and also Joshua Speed, he's a likable guy, I guess. Henry is great. Lincoln is great. Mary, she's kind of hit and miss for me, but overall the characters are very, very likable, and they're very enjoyable to watch, and you get attached to them relatively well throughout the film. Pro number 4 is that the production values for the film overall are pretty good. I have seen better, to be 100% honest. Like, I've seen other period piece president films, and especially period piece Civil War films and period piece Revolutionary War films, where the production values are damn good. To the point where I feel like I'm actually in the environment of the Revolutionary War. I'm in the environment of the Civil War. Blue and the Gray, for example. Glory, for example. That's an excellent recreation of Civil War, or Civil War era. Excellent recreation of the 1800s. Here, it clearly is. I mean, it's a good representation of the 1800s. However, I don't think it's amazing at it, because you don't really see that much of it. And in some cases, aside from the clothes that they're wearing, I kind of feel like you couldn't really tell that this is supposed to be the 1800s. But then again, this is a fantasy film, a fantasy action movie, so I guess you could kind of let it slide. But still, overall, the production values are very good. The recreation of the White House looks great. The recreation of a lot of places where Lincoln gave his famous speeches, because Lincoln was very famous for being a very good speaker. And also, like probably the best in the film is the recreation of the Gettysburg Address, which was the very, very famous speech that Lincoln gave after the Battle of Gettysburg, the one that starts with 77 years ago. That speech, that's the Gettysburg Address. That is wonderfully recreated, almost to a T. Just the only difference is that you can tell that Lincoln doesn't look the same. But other than that, the Gettysburg Address scene is very well executed. And just overall, the production values are very solid. I will give a movie a lot of credit if it's a period piece, if it recreates the 1800s well. And this movie does it good. I've still seen better, but it's still overall very solid. Though this movie isn't no Glory or The Blue and the Gray. And the last pro that I have is that the fight scenes in the film are awesome. They're very, very, very quickly edited. They're very quickly paced. There's a lot of quick shots, and there's a lot of speed involved. There's not a whole lot of hand-to-hand combat involved. It's mainly just Abraham Lincoln swinging an axe around, because that's the weapon he uses to kill. That's the weapon he uses to kill vampires. Is a giant axe that he used when he was a rail splitter. That actually was a real job that Lincoln had. He was a rail splitter. For those of you who don't know, actually, let me look it up. He was a rail splitter is somebody who splits logs for building fences. And it also was a nickname for Abe Lincoln because that's a job that he had before he was president. Anyway, the fight scenes are well choreographed. There's excellent use of slow motion, sped up motion, I guess. They're well edited. They're well choreographed. They don't seem sloppy in any way. They don't seem like they're poorly executed, like in Batman Begins, for example, where their fight scenes are so pathetically choreographed you can't, and so sloppily edited you can't tell what the fuck is going on. But overall, the fight scenes in the film, they're very good. They're very entertaining. They're very fast paced. They're just cool. They're really fun to watch. So with all the pros about this movie said, let's get to the cons. There's only 4. The first con is that I feel like we could have gone for some more training scenes. I actually didn't know that it was over a period of 10 years had gone past until I was looking up research for this film. Because in the movie, it feels like maybe 3 years had gone by in which Lincoln had mastered the art of vampire hunting. Which I kind of think is bullshit because I really don't. I feel like it's kind of laziness on the filmmaker's part, where they just kind of gloss over time periods that you'd think would be important to the story, and they just simply say, "Oh, it's 10 years that passed," and only giving us not really like brief glimpses, but you feel like the glimpses into Lincoln's training are too short. And you just get the sense that he either A, had natural talent, or B, he just magically knew how to do all this kind of shit on the snap of a finger just because the plot said he needs to. I would have liked to see more training scenes that actually showed him progress and be able to actually take out Henry and also prove himself to be a worthy vampire hunter. Con number 2, and this leads into the next issue that I have, is that I feel like there's too few solo vampire kills. I believe Lincoln kills only, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 vampires once he arrives at Springfield, Illinois. And I just feel like that's not enough. I would have liked to see more vampire kills where he develops many tricks up his sleeve in dealing with the many tricks that the vampires have up their sleeves, like turning into mist, using super speed, using super strength, him using his ingenuity to not just his brains but his brawn to take out the vampires. I would have liked to see more scenes of that rather than just him again seemingly just being to effortlessly overpower these superhuman beings, seemingly with little effort. I would have liked to see more of that because I also would have liked to see him kind of get his ass kicked in the first couple of years of him being a vampire hunter. But we don't get that. And like I said with the first con, it just kind of seems like Lincoln magically just learns how to take out these vampires seemingly with little effort, and I just think it's a little jarring and it's a little lazily done. Con number 3 is that the color scheme of this movie is terrible. It has the Tim Burton feel to it in the fact that there's a lot of muted, blank, dreary colors throughout the film. Oftentimes, in broad daylight, the film has an almost sepia tone color scheme to it, where a lot of it is orangish brown. And at night, it's intentionally be a very bright-ish kind of blue, like this color blue right here. The entire night sky and everything under the night sky is this color of blue. And it's a little annoying. You never actually see a clear, full sky, a normal clear sky in this movie whatsoever. It feels very, very, very just artificially lightened, and it doesn't look that good. And the last issue that I have is that the CGI used in this movie, it looks pretty fucking terrible. The absolute worst is during Lincoln's final fight with Jack Bartz. Bartz causes a horse stampede, and in the entire scene, it's very obvious that the horses are CG because they look extremely cartoonish. Extremely, extremely cartoonish. They look like PS3 cutscenes. They look absolutely horrendous. I've seen better CG horses in The Last of Us. Great game, but it just goes to show how terrible the CG horses in this movie look. They look very cartoonish. And also the CG vampire mouths, because one thing I don't like about the vampires in this film is that they over-exaggeratedly, like, open their jaws extra wide in order to make them look more threatening and look more monstrous. And it's very obvious that they're CG enhanced when they could have just used practical effects. It looks very, very noticeable, and it looks very cartoonish. And that's the best way I can describe the bad CG in this film, is that it looks very cartoonish. And also, back to the color scheme real quick, is that the blood in this movie, it doesn't look like this shade of red. It looks almost black, which, granted, that is how that is a realistic look for blood, is like a really old or really thick blood almost looks black. However, here at least you can still tell that it has a red tinge to it. In Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, even human blood looks almost pure black. You don't see the red tinge to it whatsoever. The only way you can tell that it's blood is when you see thinner puddles of blood on the floor. Like, say you see smears. The main handprint would be pure black, but the smears up the wall would be very dark red. But overall, the color scheme for the blood in this movie is terrible, and the CG used in this movie, it's really, really bad. It's very, very cartoonish. So with all that said about Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, despite the film's problems, I still do recommend you check out this movie. It's a very entertaining film. For its title, yes, it's ridiculous, but it delivers on the goods. It's a very fun action movie. It's an entertaining president film. And again, the premise is executed well, and overall, it's very entertaining. You can't go wrong. And if you go into this movie expecting it to be one of the greatest movies ever made, you got two things. One, you're an idiot, and two, you're going to be disappointed. But if you go into this movie expecting it to just be a fun action movie with some fun fight scenes and some decent characters, you'll be pleasantly surprised. I am going to award it the same score from my original review, and that is a 7.5 out of 10. I still feel like that's a very fair score. It's a very, very solid movie, very entertaining. It's got some problems, though. And if you take it too seriously, you're going to hate it. Excuse me. So, post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends, and as always, track down a vampire and have him teach you how to kill vampires. Pick up an axe and start swinging. And I will see you in the next video.